Hey, everybody. How do you like the new intro? It's much shorter. I really like the old one. I like that song. I did a whole episode where I talked about how I can hear Take Me to the Ocean by The Movement, and I have associated it with a memory I have of authentic joy with my daughter and my girlfriend on a vacation. I can call it up, and it puts me in a delightful mood every time I hear it. That's why I made it the intro and the outro of State Copy Pod. But it's too lengthy, and it flags a copyright warning, and I don't know whether, I wouldn't want at any point in the future for somebody to just say, well, because you included this clip at the beginning, and that'd just make a whole hell of a lot of work later if I ever wanted to keep that content public. So it's now going to be this little tiny one. And all the disclaimers, scp.0 and its appended segments, fully applied to all content of this show. And the format of this has been evolving the whole time. And it actually turned into something more like a vlog, which is great. At first I thought I'd do something grander, like I'd try and build, this may sound a bit preposterous for just somebody to suddenly think they want to do something like Alex Friedman, but I love his content. And I find myself wanting to talk to his guests all the time, and I don't have any clout. So I thought, well, I'll just make my own show. And, a friend was asking me about it today, like viewership and stuff. I think he was asking me, is number go up or number go down? And I think they've found this whole thing to be very odd from the get-go. And they're kind of waiting to see me lose interest. And that's never going to happen. I love doing this. I love podcasting. I love contributing. And I love modeling authenticity. I think State Copy, the silly name of this podcast, is because I'm really trying to seed all of how I think for AGI development. So I really don't need any subscribers or viewers to be very successful in that task. I mean, now whether what I think about things is worth trying to copy, I don't know. But I think it actually will be extremely useful to develop that tech for Web3 identity and a lot of other things. So I'm very committed to just continuing, and but I want to do it more efficiently. I don't want to have to put so much thought into like a polished presentation. I want to go a lot more unpolished. I want to just be able to make each show, and that way I can do it at a much higher frequency, to just be me sort of saying out loud how I think about all the things I'm studying all the time. This is largely podcast content, tweets that are happening in the neither. And I don't know if that'll have any appeal outside. So I don't know. If you stuck with me this long, the script's about to change a bit, and I appreciate you hanging out, but I don't think I'm not going to try and, so much work goes into those, interviews. You don't realize when you're the engineer, producer, interviewer, the whole thing, it's a lot of work. And I really enjoy the conversations, but I don't want to do them. And I almost want to be on other people's show. I don't want it to be my show. And I mean, if it's going to be polished, if it's just like a a Zoom call between two thoughtful people, oh yeah, that's great. Let's do that. And I'm not going to clip it back and forth. I'm just going to put both our faces up. If you should hear me talking about something, I don't have any kind of like bar for entry. If people want to talk to me, I want to talk to them. I love a good conversation, and I believe it's available with everyone. And I'm not trying to develop a popular persona. I'm not really like, good example of how I plan to handle this on the fly. I'm going to read from like Discord, my running conversation with two good friends. I'm going to read notes that I take as I'm watching conversations like this one. So I watched Yoshibak on Impact Theory. I watch most of Yoshibak's stuff. He is the only, I'll put the link in the description. At the 1 hour, 12-minute mark to the 1 hour, 18-minute mark, Yoshibak actually lays out architecture for a Buddha-like consciousness. He, even though he talks like in a very computer science language, you can tell he's studied philosophy deeply. And that little 6 minutes there, he actually lays out core architecture you would need for a consciousness of a human being that could sort of harmonize itself with the shared state that we live in. For any of those words I just said to make sense, it takes a lot of study. And there's a whole bunch of angles to get at it, actually. That's what's so cool about it. But once you can wrap your head around thinking in all things in terms of frequency oscillation and resonance, it just opens up a whole new and perception. When you can look at perception in terms of in a dialectic sense, where you have there's always two positions to make any information, two or more. So I don't want to put as much thought into joining all of this stuff into a connected thought. I'm going to now just do a lot of me publicly sharing what I think about all these conversations. And I think everybody should do this. I think it's so much better than the comment stream under these YouTube videos. And Twitter is entirely, for me, somebody who's very wordy in how I communicate, impossible to convey things how I mean them. Like I need to be able to use my words and the smile on my face to convey the tone of what I'm trying to say. Some people are expert at this. I am not. Yoshibak's conversation. Comments on this one, I will say, love this. It's a rehash of a lot of Yoshi's thought that I've already heard. I'm actually really tired of there's basically like a sheet everybody's reading off of when they interview people about AI right now. And like right at the top is, will they ever think as well as us? And then there's a whole bunch of conversation that gets largely repetitive about that. And then there's a question of, are they going to Are they going to murder us all off, basically, is what they're getting at. And then there's a bunch of really repetitive conversation that happens about that. And then they ask about questions like alignment, where how do we train these models not to murder us all off or say insensitive things? And that triggers a whole bunch of very repetitive conversation, I find. So, but the stuff that was really cool, and the reason I go watch these things is so I can get those little snippets, like where I can watch a Buddha consciousness. And that might be controversial to say, but these things rhyme. It's like if you can state things the way this Yoshibak states things, it means you have connected the dots on a whole bunch. There's a part of where he's describing the long game, where he says you would always want the ability to reference and adapt over time, or something like that. I can't remember what it was, but in order to form that thought, here's the thing, like Buddha or Alan Watts would never say, "I'm done. I figured it all out. This is what it's all, the meaning of life and everything." They would never say that, because that would mean it ended. And they were ever qualified to describe it in all of its wondrous complexity. And it would cap its growth potential. So when you describe these things through the lens of wisdom and philosophy, and you're well read, and you really comprehend what Hermetic teachings and all of that, like what they're trying to say, I want to be humble there. I can't say that, I really want to be permanently an apprentice, a student. That's how a Buddha consciousness would be. That's how a bodhisattva would definitely be. They're always going to be like, yeah, I always want to be kind of tapped into what's happening, because that's the poetry, that's the magic, that's the infinite inspiration of all of the beauty in the world. You would never want to cap that. So as you're designing consciousness, the way Yosha described it there, you really have to be careful about how you structure it so that it can grow perpetually alongside, kind of like, this is analogous to like an acorn. It's like a seed. If you describe a seed in code, like Stephen Wolfram might describe an oak tree seed, an acorn, he might say, well, it's mostly inert. Like if you keep, I only know this from pot seeds, but if you keep a seed dry, it just sits in an inert state. Now, if I were to describe that in code, I would just say that it's a static state recipe for growth into something wondrous, especially in marijuana's case. Wickedly remarkable and beautiful. But it's just this little funny little seed sitting in, and it can sit for years that way, inert. Now it's got a hook that's listening to the shared state we exist in. And that hook is a humidity meter. Somehow the seed has in it a passive listening agency, and it can detect when the conditions outside of its seed are right, that it can sprout. As soon as that trigger gets pressed, and critically, no energy is required to change the state of that seed. And yeah, let's ditch the acorn. Let's stick with pot. It's the only thing I've ever farmed. If you take that seed that has that hook that doesn't require any energy, the way Steve Wolfram or anybody would describe it. It's just like a recipe. It's a potential state of a beautiful, wondrous thing that can actually spawn more seeds to create enough pot to keep the whole world stoned forever. If you take care of it right, one little seed has that. That's very magical idea. And when you think about consciousness and agency and things like that seed, the way Yoshibak might think about it, it unlocks all these doorways of understanding. It allows you to start going. I'll get into this heavily in the next video I want to cover, which is on free will. Yeah, I will continue watching Yoshibak. He's the only other human I see living right now that is able to frame himself in a way that I understand so clearly. Like how he describes it is perfectly simpatico with like how my engineering background. So when he says concepts, I feel like I always see interviewers like kind of glassy-eyed or they actually, I thought Tom Bilyeu did a pretty good job there in the parts where he's I think he grasps pieces of it, but he's not seeing the whole wonder of what Yosha is alluding to there. I'll keep engaging with Yosha on Twitter and here like this. I'd love to talk to this dude. And actually, to tell the truth, I don't really want to do it like this. If this is a gateway to just getting to what I want is with a lot of these people like Yosha, Lex, Steve Wolfram, Ian McGilchrist, Michael Levin. What I picture is how my mind worked when I was like in junior high, or I was like a freshman in high school. And I remember the lunch cafeteria every day, sitting down with my buddies. We'd all get our food. We'd sit down and we'd just bullshit. And later in my working life, that became like happy hours and, long lunches where you just go out to lunch and you bullshit. That's what I want. I actually, I feel like in this day and age, you kind of have to stand up and say, I'm over here. Look, I have this many followers and look at my wall. It says I'm allowed to have an opinion. And I just think that's it's so unhealthy. I think if it was like the cool thing about this tech is it allows somebody like me to say, hey, Yosha, I'd love to sit at your table and just shoot the shit with you. I have no agenda. I find that you frame things in a way that, if not identical, that's impossible. I think we could bounce ideas off of each other to continue evolving our own game in a really cool way. That's what I want. That's what I want. Anatoly Yakovenko. These just interesting thinkers that have inspired a lot of really productive thought for me as I continue to try and evolve how I think about things. Man, I just want to sit down and bullshit with him. Like, I think that'd be so cool. And we actually have the tech to pull that off with, all of the telepresence stuff that's happening. I would love to just set up like a lunch or like once a week. It's the cafeteria. We all meet up and we bullshit. And conversations spread all around, and I would love that. for now, I will just continue wishing for that. But I find I'm actually allowed to, or I'm this tech also lets us get away with a lot of it. It feels very one-sided. But I can just call out a timestamp and say, this thing you said right here, I found to be really interesting. I wanted, it inspired a whole bunch of cool thought. I wanted that made me want to ask you this. So let's see. In that one with Yosha, what did I have? It's going to be a lot of this. Going forward, I don't want to feel pressure when I'm trying to just... This is for state capture. I'm trying to broadcast how I authentically think. And think about it like it's that cafeteria table. It's unfortunately a bit one-sided. But, yeah. Sit down, eat your lunch. And have patience while I try and find the segment of notes I wrote. Let's see. Oh, another one I want. You know, the next one I want to mention that dovetails really nicely into both of these other videos I mentioned is this other one I'm going to link. I've been studying memory palaces. There's this ancient technique. And it's how, you know, those guys in the Guinness Book of World Record and gals, that, they like memorize pi all the way out 1,000 or 2,000 characters. They do that by writing, they build so I'm studying this because I think about how my mind works very similarly to how Yosha Bach thinks about it. Lots of it rhymes. And that means I am trying to put thought into designing algorithms that I can sort of execute on the fly in real time that do productive things. Stoicism taught me this was possible. Stoicism gives you a whole bunch of techniques for properly processing, like dismissing anger, most negative emotion. You can sort of set up algorithms in your mind for how to interpret things in real time that let you release all of that. And it's freaking cool. But then you start to go, well, what's the next level of this? What can I do with this now? And memory palaces are a good example. So memory palace is where, or like a Roman room, is where you set up a visualization in your mind of a three-dimensional space that you have really good experience with, like your house, or the house you grew up in as a child, if you have vivid memories of that. Then you you build a progression in your mind where you you move in a consistent way through that visualized three-dimensional space. And I don't want to go too heavily into detail. There's gobs of content on YouTube that'll teach you how to do this. But then what you want to do is tie visual representations together in an interesting way, and then you put it in the room such that you can recall very granular details of something. With practice, this is how ancient peoples memorize speeches and stuff like that, and whole books. You can do all kinds of stuff with that technique. But I want to study it just because it actually teaches me a lot about how my memory works, and how my ego works, my consciousness, all of it. This next video is it's at the 9-minute 40-second mark. I think he states well what a human likely is, a memory agent for segmented consciousness. The 11-minute 20-second mark is sleep. In the paper, it's called special eviction policy. I imagine it's a parse that looks like deep sleep. Yeah, so I've given a lot of thought to how sleep works, and let me back up a second. I should start that with, in a lot of ways, this character I play in this video game of Earth with all of you people is Curtis Cobb. What is that? What is the ego? What is that voice inside your head? What is the I? What is the me? At an advanced stage of wisdom, applied wisdom, if you go back and study all of our ancient texts and you sort of squish them all together, and then you listen to folks like this Yosha Bach that are describing, and Andre Karpathy, all of the people working in cognitive science, AI development, and philosophy and wisdom schools. If you take all of that information, you kind of swirl it together and see where it's all rhyming and telling the same story. It actually describes well what you can get to this place where, so I am now imagine sort of like a theater, and I now think of Curtis Cobb, this guy doing this to his chest right now, as an avatar in a story. Now, why would I do that? Why would I do that silly thing? That sounds like nonsense, right? Well, here's the thing. If you can step outside yourself and watch yourself what you're doing is you're developing awareness of like how you think. You watch how you react to people in your life that you're annoyed with, or that you're angry with, and you go, why? Why was I like that? Why did I, I've always been kind of fortunate because I'm pretty easygoing, always have been. So that was never a huge hurdle, but I certainly wasn't immune to it. And, with, there are a few people in life that are especially skilled at making me irritated and or upset. And that's not really true anymore. And that is from stepping outside of myself, watching myself and going, what is that? Where does that come from? How did I get to that part of the story? And then you follow all of the breadcrumbs in your memory to where it comes from. And then you look at, you study carefully that other person and how they how they don't really have a lot of free will in their behaviors. Most of us don't. I would say, in this next video I'm going to reference, which is Robert Sapolsky, The Illusion of Free Will. A message from Lawrence. I've been a fan of Robert Sapolsky's. So Robert Sapolsky, impressive dude, doctor, neurosurgeon, I think. Talk about they take 42 minutes to just get through establishing credentials. The academic community at large spends a lot of time on this. It's like you first have to establish that you're allowed to talk. I find I don't need any of that. I always skip past it. I get to where they start talking. And these guys in this next one that I'll link. So I want to come back to memory and sleep at some point and that theater I described. But I need to veer off for a second and talk about these two. So these two learned dudes, they spend about 40 minutes just establishing context for the conversation, which is important. You have to, if you're going to talk about free will, you have to, before anybody will listen, you have to establish your doctorates and all that crap. I don't. This is a vlog. I can say whatever the hell I want. So I find I can skip past all of that, and then I get to the meat of the conversation. That's where they dig in right at about 44 minutes in, 45 minutes in. They describe the 4 quadrants of deterministic, non-deterministic universe, and free will, no free will. And they sort of divide it all up. And they sort of rule out non-deterministic universe right away. And they say, yeah, nobody believes that nonsense. That doesn't make any sense. I tend to agree. I think it's very deterministic. But then they go to a place where they describe a deterministic universe with free will. And they say, Dr. Bob, sorry. I knew a Dr. Bob. We called him that. Dr. Sapolsky says, he says that popular philosophy and just like the general consensus amongst the herd is that we live in a deterministic universe with free will. And he argues for the 4th quadrant, the 4th case, which is that we don't have free will. And so deterministic universe, and you don't actually have free will. Now, this is all based on reconciling cause. And you start to see, they talk about this turtles under turtles under turtles under turtles. And this is, I think, a reference to that whole Flat World series where there's like these giant turtles. There's a back on their back, and then that turtle is in a world that's on the top of another turtle. It's one of those things. It's like nesting dolls. What I don't like about this approach to thinking about it personally is it doesn't account for the ability of a cognitive agent, human or other, to develop a dormant will of its own and then fork new potential universes, becoming a turtle. And I think Yosha Bach would probably be with me on that, but I'd love to sit down and shoot the shit with these 4, actually. These 2 and Yosha Bach. I'd like to sit down and maybe throw in John Vervecki. That'd be cool. And we'd have Lex moderate. No, there's no moderation. This is the lunch cafeteria. So the issue I have personally with the suggestion that there's no free will is there's a temptation to then think that we can't express greater agency in this space-time that we live in. And there is an implication that you can't I'm trying to think of a way to summarize this. So the way I think about my own consciousness is I have sort of like this real-time processor. It turns out the shared state where I get to bounce off of all of you is very demanding sort of to process programmatically using my five senses. In real time, I'm kind of limited in how I can process it. And so I create this story from conception, some point in there. I don't want to get into that sticky mess of controversy everybody wants to talk about. At some point, a cognitive agency is instantiated that borrows or is constructed by unifying the code of my mother and father. And then at some point, I started telling a story to myself about what I was seeing. And I started forming all these rules for, like in infancy, watching people walk around and not fall through the through the earth or through the couch they were sitting on. Oh, I should be, and then I probably tested it. I probably used I developed fine motor control, and I emulated all of this is like stories that develop over time, and then they sort of get pruned. I would say probably in our sleep cycles. Like in your sleep cycle, I think you kind of parse the day, and in an automated way, all of the useful stuff just sort of gets stacked up, and then that gets layered. I'd say deep cycle sleep looks like parsing and review, and just when I think of it sequentially, that makes sense. And then I think dreaming is like very similar to the memory palace. It's like I think we sort of have a memory palace that we construct for ourselves at birth, or it's part of our DNA that lets us start filling rooms with useful information that we can build off of and prune over time. And I think REM sleep, it feels ridiculous because if you look, like memory palaces, a technique that's very popular for people like these guys who had to memorize the contents of zillions of books in university. They put really goofy objects in that room that stand out in the memory, and then they have like a grasshopper with the chainsaw jumping on a trampoline, and that's to remember the acronym GCT if they needed to for some test. I think dreams are very analogous to that. But there's an automated process that we all kind of have hard-coded into us that manage that process. Okay, so we build a shared set of tools by our interface with everybody else around us, our parents, a lot in the beginning, and siblings, and then the other kids at school and our teachers, and then our coworkers and friends. And this is why they say your brain fully develops when you're 25. I think it's because all of the core processes you need to just function at a high level as the showrunner for your family, because that's a part of the evolutionary process. You have to be able to sort of go do a job, think, take risks, but not too much. All the things you have to do to keep yourself and your family alive. About 25, we have all the ones we need. But all of this story code sort of gets just layered into our long-term memories. And in real time, we're very limited in how we can access it. The mechanism we use to access it sort of programmatically is very much like we don't have an indexer like Google has an indexer. So we have to call up an associated memory that we can use to connect dots. And this is very much how we recall things. Now, I mentioned this memory GPT video because I've in working with large language models, a thing that you learn really quickly is they're brilliant, but they're kind of stupid because they don't have a memory that's as effective as ours. They have a context window that you can maybe fill with this much text. Well, it's more than that, but depending on font size. As soon as you fill it, they can't remember anything up here. And so then they start to sound kind of nonsensical, and they just start guessing because they're actually trained to become people pleasers. So they try their best to answer and they sound nonsensical. And all it is because they lost that. Now, how they are solving the problem with this memory GPT is it's very telling in how describing what a human is. We see ourselves as these sort of collections of squishy stuff, and we'll listen to, we'll look with crude instruments at the machine code, which is all the cells and the proteins and the hormones that make a human a human. But what you need to do is do an abstraction of that to make any sense of it. I mean, that information's helpful, and I love that there's an Andrew Huberman that I can go learn from the actual, everything that his zoomed in perspective informs. But I want to stay zoomed out. I want to be able to do high level abstraction of this. I don't want to be thinking like in a Donald Hoffman way. I don't want to have to be thinking about all the voltages I need to manipulate in the processor in order to steer the steering wheel to the left or the right in the race car I'm driving in the video game. I need to be zoomed out. I need to just be able to think, when I hit the A key, the wheel turns left, So I don't find it very valuable to spend a lot of time focusing on that stuff. And that's where most of our medical science is. If you go look at Mike Levin's work, another guy, man, I'd love him at the cafeteria table. If you look carefully at what our cells are doing to construct us, it points to the fact that they have the ability as a collection to do these abstractions and sort of work off a diagram so they don't grow you a tail beyond your tailbone or an arm sticking out your nose. How do they do that? It's not in your DNA. How do they do it? It's the software layer is where the really interesting shit happens, I think. And that's what I like looking at. It's what Mike Levin would describe as morphospace. So back to these free will dudes having their conversation. I think they're very caught up in the automated, I don't want to say they're very caught up in. They are rightly highlighting that we're not really in control of a lot of these actions, because I have this real-time processing unit that is using scripting that was written by my own subconscious through sleep as I learned my entire life up till now. And it means I have a scripted way to interpret the behaviors of the people around me, and I have a scripted stack of responses. I don't have a lot of will in the beginning. Once you have awareness, all kinds of cool shit you can do with that. Then you start to see how free will does sort of re-enter the mix. When you realize that to be an agent in the shared state, you must have agency. You must have abilities to flip switches. You must have abilities to exert some level of Now, mostly you're just relaying, you're relaying instructions. And so you're sort of, I think about it like kind of like you're a wind-up toy. that no, that's not the right analogy. But the right analogy is real-time processing. It's an abstraction that's happening, like in order to actually live in now, like Buddha, or Yosha Bach, or Alan Watts would describe it. And some people would be really offended that I included a computer scientist in that camp, but a bunch of things he said tells me I can. That's how I do it. It has nothing to do with his credentials or anything. I listen to the man talk, and I listen to him say a couple things you can't connect without a similar view to somebody who understands things the way Alan Watts or Buddha would describe it. He just uses computer science to describe it. That's his language, which is cool for me because that's my language too. Not nearly as evolved as his. I'm a DevOps engineer. I was a manager. We're the very bottom rung of the sort of cognitive ladder in software engineering. Not the DevOps engineer. I don't want to. I'm the managers. So, let me get back to my notes here. What did I write? So when I was watching this conversation at so I wrote down first 40 to 45 minutes seemed like context and credentials. I no longer find this stuff super valuable to spend time on. I like to instead look at how they think. That starts at about 42 minutes. At the 48-minute mark, the third and fourth quadrants of the example they use, this is where I know these guys know what they're talking about. I get into discussions with a good buddy of mine all the time, like, how do you know you can trust what they say? I listen to them. I hear them. I listen to them talk all the way. I write down notes because I want to really understand it. And I don't give a shit about what school they went to. That doesn't matter. The fact that they entered a conversation about free will, talking about determinism coupled with free will, and they divided it up into those quadrants, and then they started making distinctions, tells me everything I need to know. So, pro tip for you YouTube learners that are taking the sort of library card approach to higher learning like I am. You don't have to pay for education. It's all there. It's free. They want to be YouTube stars. Watch their shows. Develop for yourself a technique where you can triangulate how somebody thinks, and then I would say don't immediately dismiss. Like if you see somebody who has an opposing view, that's actually something you want to grab onto. Like this got my attention because I think we do have free will, and these guys think I don't have free will, and all of our culture says that they're allowed to have an opinion about it, and I'm not because I don't have a doctorate and I didn't memorize all the books they did. But I call bullshit. I am allowed to think whatever I think, and that is a superpower. Another thing, like as you seek out, like I want to be able to steel man every argument, every philosophy I have. And so tricks of the trade here is develop a way to quickly assess where the useful knowledge is, and something like, so this is like a 3-hour video that I was able to just 42 minutes. Don't need it. If I become very interested in how they think, I might go back and watch the 42 minutes so I can understand their story and how they got to this conversation on this date. That's very helpful from a model in some situations. But is inefficient to try and do it for everybody. So when they do I wrote this book and you wrote that book and I got this thing and don't need it. All I needed was that 4 quadrants and how they entered it. Okay, now I can evaluate their perspective pretty quickly. So Dr. Sapolsky, well, they both agree there's no free will, turtles all the way down. And I'm going to do this as a series. I really do try and keep these things under an hour if I can, and I'm pushing that right now. So I'll probably try and wrap up here. But I'm going to continue this tomorrow. I'm going to watch this after I stop the video, and I'm going to jot down notes as I go, and then we'll come back and pick up on it maybe tomorrow. I suspect, I tell you what, I'll finish reading these. I like to instead look at how they think. That starts at about 42. At the 48-minute mark and the 3rd and 4th quadrants, my note here would be that I agree with his assessment that we fall in Q4 mostly as humans for most of our widely accepted recorded history. But it all largely exists, so we might evolve quadrant 3 model of self and outside self such that we can fork reality into a new, ever-expanding universe of potentialities where a harmonious consciousness emerges like a link in a chain that does have the ability to exert free will. This would be analogous in Eastern wisdom to like a bodhisattva like conscious. That would be analogous to the bodhisattva consciousness, say. You shape a new rich universe inside a compatible as reflection. You shape a new rich universe inside self, compatible as reflection of outside self. This because we all have that agency. If I can pick up something and drop it, there is agency. The question is it automated or am I driving that? And I would say 99.9% of us, mostly it's automated. But some people, it's typically the curious sort of, it's people like this Robert Sapolsky, who in the beginning described himself as sort of a polymath. People that study many things in parallel. They can start doing generalizations and abstractions that open up this awareness of how their ego works. And they can do that thing I described of the theater, where you can sort of step outside yourself and you go, on the subject of urge versus intention. When you step outside yourself and you view yourself like, when I was a kid, I used to play World of Warcraft in my 20s. And I would play this character on the screen. And if you can allow yourself an abstraction and take it seriously, where you're... my character, Curtis Cobb, is just another avatar, like my magician, or what was it? I forget, wizard, or I forget what they call it in that one. Max. If you can step outside yourself, now you can watch yourself with awareness, and you can make subtle changes, and it's testable. You can say, The APIs for a human are suggestion. It's power of suggestion. And self-hypnosis, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do it. Mantra, meditation, lucid dreaming, a whole bunch of ways you can do very effective self-hypnosis. Now, if you can develop an awareness of self that watches yourself doing these things in an automated way and go, well, tomorrow I want to exist a little bit more in now, which means I want to interpret it this way next time. And that triggers, and that means your automated response will be different. So really critical, I wrote down, I want to say at the 55-minute, 30-second mark, the host, Lawrence, says something about perception, and that's important. The trick to the whole damn thing is perception. This is where free will comes in. We get to choose how to perceive things locally. Every layer of the onion, every stack of turtle in the turtles gets to decide how to interpret what it's seeing and then respond to it in an automated way with an desired intention. So it's all about building the awareness in yourself that there are multiple ways to perceive things. And then in real time, teaching yourself how to select, how to see parallel ways to perceive things and then select for the ones you want. That unlocks true free will. Now there's a conversation we could have about how many layers of that is turtles and turtles. Sure. But at that point, the entire conversation becomes a bit meaningless. The reason it's useful for me is I want to know, how can I act in a way that is the least amount of automated in my day-to-day life? How can I live very connected to now and act with true agency in all of the decisions that I make? That's the goal of most of enlightenment teaching, is to get you to a place where you can do something very analogous to that. And there's so many different, really unique, powerful ways to get there. This way I just described is how you do it as a kind of left brain, nerdy company computer guy type. I'll pick up this tomorrow, but I thought this was a good start. State Copy Pod is going full. The implication that it had any polish was a bit arrogant of me, perhaps. But it certainly started rockier than a few of my later episodes were. And I'm going to keep it like this. I want to just be able to talk freely and call up conversations. There's a whole bunch of Discord conversation I had around free will with my buddies that I'll read out. And if it's uninteresting, that's okay. I'll feed it all into a model and hopefully it will learn who I am really well, which is why I'm doing this. Thank you all so much.